Hi there guys, this is Richard, your host, bringing to you another marvelous video. Maniac Cop trilogy is one of the best horror sequels that emerged from the late 80s and early 90s. Continuity of storyline is a prerequisite in horror sequels, but so often the on-screen torch is passed between the cast and crew, altering the expected flow of the franchises. But Maniac Cop franchises are an exception, where the trilogy was written by Larry Cohen, directed by William Lustig, and starred Robert Z'Dar as the Maniac Cop Mathew Cordell. The first film, Maniac Cop, came with a tagline, "You have the right to remain silent forever," which precisely highlighted the entertaining terror content of the movie. Filmmaker Larry Cohen wanted to create a slasher that was light and funny, with intelligent characters rather than gory horror. The franchise centers on a once-respected cop, Matt Cordell, preferring brutality and excessive force, being targeted in a corruption case, and finally landing in prison. He was attacked by his fellow prisoners and considered dead. He returned as the Maniac Cop and started avenging his betrayal by going on a killing spree in New York. Detective Colonel Frank McCrae, featured by Tom Atkins, had been assigned the case, but he soon realized that the issue was much more complicated than it appeared. Before the storylines of the trilogy are explained, the backstory must be revealed.
Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Maniac Cop origin and backstory. Matt Cordell was a good-hearted but brutal cop who merely cared for police protocol. Yet he had earned respect and a good name in the police department. Eventually, he was investigating a crime where Mayor Jerry Killian was involved and was about to close the case when the mayor and some of his known police officers framed Cordell for a people's rights violation charge. Their forgery mission was accomplished when Matt was sentenced to the Sing Sing Correctional Facility. There, Matt confronted many prisoners incarcerated by him, and they finally killed him. In the autopsy, Matt exhibited very faint signs of life, although he was utterly brain dead. His girlfriend Sally tried to commit suicide after finding Matt's condition, but fortunately she survived only with a broken leg. Sally later found out that Matt was only brain dead, and he was released into her custody. Matt was infuriated with the betrayals of the police force, where he had dedicated his life, and the consequences of the betrayal, and thus he went on a terrible killing spree in New York. You have the right to remain silent forever. Maniac Cop, released in 1988, explained. The movie opened up in New York City, where a waitress named Cassie Phillips was returning home from her work when she was mugged by two teenage hoodlums. She tried to flee and banged onto a police officer from whom she sought protection, but the officer lifted her and broke her neck instantly. The Maniac Cop continued his murder of innocent people, forcing the police department to enhance a vigorous investigation under Lieutenant Frank McCrae, while the department strictly instructed him to suppress the fact that the assailant was wearing a police uniform. Unfortunately, he passed the information to a journalist in an attempt to warn the civilians.
Facts and witnesses to these murders point unmistakably to a uniformed police officer,
resulting in massive panic and dissent among the people. Paranoid people started targeting innocent police officers, and in the uproar, a patrolman was shot. Jack W. Forrest, an officer in NYPD, and his wife Ellen constantly argued about his negligence towards her and odd duty hours affecting their marriage. After Jack left, an anonymous caller informed Ellen that Jack was the Maniac Cop and he would kill again.
Why does Jack keep killing people? Is he gonna do it again tonight?
Ellen grabbed a gun and followed Jack to a local motel, where she found him in bed with another woman. Ellen, though infuriated, was relieved to know that Jack was not the Maniac Cop. And while she stepped into the car, she was kidnapped by the Maniac Cop. The maid discovered her dead body in the same motel room which Jack had booked, and Jack was arrested under suspicion of the murder of his wife, though Frank had the opinion that Jack was innocent and was being framed. On interrogating Jack, he confessed to Frank about his affair with police officer Mallory, who was working undercover as a prostitute. Meanwhile, she was also attacked by the Maniac Cop when Detective Frank arrived on the spot, and together they shot the killer, who was cold as a dead body and did not seem to breathe, and he fled for the time being. As Mallory and Frank discussed the case, Mallory disclosed that Sally Noland was the only person aware of her affair with Jack. Intrigued by the fact, Frank started following Sally and finally reached a warehouse where he overheard the conversation between Sally and Maniac Cop, where she referred to him as Matt and requested him only to slaughter the people like the commissioner and the mayor responsible for betraying and incarcerating him. Suddenly, Sally spotted Frank spying on them and opened fire, while Frank escaped from the place. Maniac Cop Matt also disappeared from the warehouse while Sally was left alone and confused. Frank went back to the records department to read old newspaper articles about Officer Matt Cordell and learned everything about the incidents, about why he was arrested, his claims of being framed by his superiors, and finally, his tragic murder at the Sing Sing Correctional Facility. When Frank and Mallory visited Jack, they told him about their suspicion about Matt Cordell being the Maniac Cop. As soon as Frank visited the clerical room, he was attacked by hysterical Sally, who was convinced about Cordell avenging her. Sally no sooner was beaten to death by Cordell and threw Frank out of the window to get killed. Jack and Mallory broke out of the interrogation room only to find corpses of cops lying everywhere, and Cordell was nowhere to be seen. Frank and Mallory visited Sing Sing's medical officer, who confessed that he had secretly released Cordell's body to Sally, though he showed very feeble signs of life and was brain dead.
He had severe brain damage. I was certain that he was legally dead.
Eventually, Jack and Mallory hurried to the 50th annual St. Patrick's Day parade to warn Commissioner Pike and Captain Ripley about Cordell, as they were involved in Cordell's framing. They did not believe Mallory and had her arrested, allowing Cordell to slay them by stabbing. Cordell tried to attack Mallory next, but she escaped through the window. Jack was also arrested and placed in a van, which Cordell hijacked and took to his hideout. Mallory and Officer Bremer followed the van, and in the resulting attack, Bremer was killed, and Cordell was about to escape in the van when police backup arrived. Jack clung to the side of the van and distracted Cordell, causing him to crash the vehicle in the river. The van was pulled out of the water without any trace of Cordell. As everyone believed Cordell was dead, his hand rose out of the water, completely unnoticed by anyone. In an extended cut, corrupt Mayor Jerry Killiam was seen relaxing in his office as the Matt Cordell's case was closed, while Cordell, hiding behind a curtain, murdered him as the credits rolled. Maniac Cop 2, released in 1991, explained. Ex-officer Matt Cordell, who was seen drowning in the prequel, came back to the shore acquiring a police cruiser. He intervened in an ongoing robbery and killed the store clerk with the robber's shotgun.
I need money. Look, no money.
And left the store while the robber was confronted and killed by the responding police officer. Jack W. Forrest Jr. and Teresa Mallory were reinstated in police duties by the new commissioner, Edward Doyle, who was also secretly responsible for framing Matt Cordell. The two had conflicted feelings, as Forrest Jr. believed that Cordell was dead. Mallory believed that Cordell was still out planning for an act of revenge. That night, when Forrest Jr. visited a newsstand run by a war veteran named Harry, he was slaughtered by Cordell, but Harry was left unharmed. Susan Riley, a police psychiatric therapist, talked to Harry about Forrest Jr.'s murder when he recalled the incident of grenade explosions causing his blindness. He also stated that he was trapped along with many corpses of soldiers after the explosion, and when he happened to touch Cordell during the murder, he was reminded of the corpses. Mallory was horrified and heartbroken over Forrest Jr.'s death and decided to talk about her experiences on a television show, but she never arrived, as Cordell attacked her on the way to the hotel. In a vehicular battle that followed, Cordell killed the cab driver, Mallory, and tied Riley, who was accompanying Mallory, to the steering wheel and pushed the cab down the road. The cab crashed, but luckily Riley escaped alive with a broken arm. In the meantime, an exotic dancer named Cheryl was attacked by a psychotic serial killer called Stephen Turkle, who had already murdered 6 strippers. She was almost strangled to death when Cordell appeared suddenly and ambushed the 2 officers called by Cheryl. He helped Turkle escape from the site, and a one-sided friendship developed between them. While hunting for another victim, Turkle gets arrested, identified by Cheryl. But very soon, Cordell stormed into the police station, killed 19 cops, and freed Turkle, Blum, and several other prisoners. Turkle was convinced that Cordell's earnest desire was to set up an army of criminals to spread mayhem. Cordell and his squad hijacked a prison bus and drove all the way to the Sing Sing Correctional Facility and somehow managed to hoax themselves in with a police squad under Commissioner Doyle and Sean McKinney waiting outside. Cordell killed the guard and entered the same cell where he was imprisoned. Commissioner Doyle, who was earlier convinced by McKinney, admitted to Cordell that he was framed and his case would be reopened and his charges would be reversed. Cordell's actual plan was to seek retribution from the 3 prisoners who attacked him, and hence he abandoned Turkel and the other prisoners. Cordell finally managed to slay the prisoners who killed him, while Turkel, realizing that Cordell had used them, tried to fight him, but in the process they both fell on the prison bus, which exploded and killed them both. Cordell was awarded complete honor and buried in the police cemetery. When everyone left, his hand came out of his grave and grabbed the badge that was left there, convincing the audience that he would be back soon. Maniac Cop 3 Badge of Silence Explained. A priest who practiced voodoo art successfully resurrected the Maniac Cop Mathew Cordell, who took his badge and returned to his bizarre life. 2 news-hungry cameramen were looking for a piece of breaking news and intervened in a convenience store robbery. The intercepting police officer, Katie Sullivan, played by Gretchen Becker, managed to shoot the suspect and wounded him, but she soon realized that the clerk of the store was the suspect's girlfriend, and she had let the suspect inside the store to help him loot. There was a crossfire in the store, and though Katie was hurt, she killed the clerk. Katie was taken to the hospital, where she was declared brain dead. Eventually, the 2 cameramen misinterpreted the entire incident, portraying the clerk as an innocent victim killed by the impetuous cop, Katie. Detective McKinney was also misinformed by the reporters who framed Katie and threatened him to release the wounded robbery suspect. Cordell, who was infatuated with Katie, had been closely observing the entire case and Katie's progress in the hospital. He apparently killed the supervising physician with defibrillator paddles and Katie's physician with X-ray radiation. Cordell also slaughtered the 4 reporters who were responsible for defaming Katie. Meanwhile, McKinney and another physician, Susan, while investigating the murders, observed unusual behavior of the comatose Katie. With their investigation, they reached the priest Hungan, who admitted to resurrecting Cordell and mentioned his infatuation with Katie, who was on the verge of death. Holding Hungan at gunpoint, Cordell compels him to resurrect Katie, but Hungan was unable to do so, stating that Katie's spirit refused to return from death.
I cannot recover this soul. She will not.
Cordell killed Hungan while he and Katie caught fire. Susan and McKinney escaped in an ambulance while Cordell chased them in a police car while his body was still ablaze. They managed to throw an oxygen tank to the vehicle Cordell was driving before crashing, and before Cordell managed to save himself, the tank blew off and the car blasted. Later, the charred, dead body of Katie was placed in the morgue beside the burnt remains of Cordell. While the lone coroner was busy with his work on the computer, the camera closed up to Cordell's hand, slowly moving and holding Katie's hand. Maniac Cop Remake. A report by Hollywood Deadline in 2016 stated that director John Hyams was set to direct a new version of Maniac Cop, which would be produced by Nicholas Winding Refn's company Space Rocket Nation and written by Ed Brubaker, also known for penning Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Though last year, Larry Cohen, the writer of the original movie, mentioned that remake of Maniac Cop was not in the radar, but Hyams claimed that the project was on the go. Hyams also claimed that the project would be completely different from the original movie, and the very reason for hiring him was due to his capability of innovation in remodeling old movies as he had done with Universal Soldier. Similarly, Refn is also known to make films uniquely rather than remaking them bluntly. Likewise, he loved the story and concept of Maniac Cop but had no intention to pay a modern tribute to it. Hyams continued that they had worked on the project for the past few years, and while they had taken the ideas of Maniac Cop, they hoped to portray a bigger plot appropriate for today's generation. Maniac Cop TV series reboot. Though Nicholas and Hyams were very passionate about rebooting Maniac Cop with their innovation and planned to start the film in the summer of 2017 in Los Angeles, the project finally culminated as a television series. Nick Refn defined his great admiration for director Hyams, stating that after exploring the concept of Maniac Cop, they decided to create greater depth in the storyline, which they believed could be accomplished through a television series. They also partnered with HBO and Canal Plus to reach out to a large audience in North America and France. NWR Originals, which is an independent studio launched by Refn, starts its first production with this series. Both Refn and Hyams are known to direct the series, as they claim that it would be an utterly action-packed horror odyssey. The executive producers are Nick Hall, Lene Borglum, Frederick Flore, Alex Gaynor, F.A. Caccarel, and William Lustig. Though the Maniac Cop didn't mainly satisfy the box office, it has earned the status of a cult classic. But undoubtedly, the reboot series has successfully garnered the attention of the audience.
And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.
I cannot recover this soul.